Should I start over? Okay. Welcome to our Tuesday, December 5th Policy Committee meeting. And this meeting we will hold, and then we will have our Committee of the Whole meeting after, as always. But we have a number of items. And our first one is policies for first reading, 606. Textbooks and instructional materials. This is to replace policies 6030, 6035, and 6040. And last month at our meeting, Cindy Miller and Jen Larva had said that this policy was going to be coming forward as well. So not a surprise there. It kind of correlates with policy 606.5 that we had the first reading on last month, dealing with library materials. And kind of a reminder, the library materials that we'll have the second reading on is based on the NSBA policy and is a new policy, but this one, again, we've had a different policy on. So, policy 606, textbooks and instructional materials, and Jen and Cindy and Dan. Dale, I mean, excuse me, Dale, sorry, yeah. I'll clean my glasses, Dale, so I can see. Okay.
What are we talking about? Dale and I just got back from meeting with students at East High School, so we're kind of like rushing in, and I apologize for that.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for meeting with students for whatever reason. So,
course catalog stuff that you'll be hearing about later.
Okay.
Another time. 606, we are bringing forward for first read today. And this is the one that is connected to 606.5, which I had Cindy present last month, I guess it's a whole month, about instructional materials for library books. And this is the other side of the flip side of it for curriculum and instruction. And Dale really took the lead on reviewing the policy and making sure that the procedural piece of it that we have made some changes to aligns with the procedural pieces that are in 606.5. So I'll let you talk for a little bit while I try to find my document.
Yeah, so when we took a look at the policy, we really stuck to the MSBA model policy for the purpose, general statements, the responsibility of selection, and the selection of textbooks. But when it came to the reconsideration, we did some modifications to make it align more to 606.5. So you'll see that there are changes there at the end under reconsideration of textbooks. We wanted to keep the two in line so that we could use the same request form. For both of them, this was brought to principals and TLE and our content specialists to also kind of take a look through that process to make sure they felt like this was something that was reasonable as a process for a community member wanting to have a reconsideration for a textbook or instructional material.
Yeah,
That's pretty much it.
pretty much it. We did add the link for the formal request for consideration in this one. I know that we had talked about that there would be one form for the library adoption and for 606.5 and 606, and that is linked in here now, so you can see the one form that's being used by both policies.
Would you say section 5B, which is what you were just talking about, Dale?
Yeah.
The formal request for reconsideration, is that primarily replacing, when I was looking at all the deleted items, 6040?
Yes.
It's
Yep.
like the old procedures for challenging.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I did notice that this is really quite similar to 606.5, is that it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's good too.
And when you look back on the 3 that we're replacing, many of them hadn't been reviewed since 2006, 2004, the other day, 2004, so definitely time for a review. Any other questions or comments?
Just to comment with both the textbook and instructional materials policy as well as the library materials policy, that sometimes with all policies we try and stay a little bit closer to the legal guidance recommendations of MSBA, just because sometimes things can get sensitive, but particularly with textbook adoption, textbook and materials, and library materials, sometimes that can turn into issues of free speech and ability to share, and so sometimes those, I was in a previous district, one of our policies ended up going before the Supreme Court in the state of Wisconsin, and so sometimes making sure that we're sticking with the language is important, even though sometimes we might want to make some internal changes, sometimes we need to stick to those, so that's kind of where I come from.
And we really did stick to the language, other than where it was very vague about the guidelines would be developed. We actually just put the guidelines in here. It's really what we try to do is be more specific about it.
And you'll see that the language that's used there is the same language that comes from the model policy for 606.5,
Yeah.
as you mentioned. So we're still staying very close to that. We just supplanted that piece in from 606.5 to spell it out more clearly.
And you said you kind of went over these procedures with staff, and it seems doable.
Yeah, there were no concerns as far as the request procedure. The various stakeholders that we brought it to felt like that was very reasonable.
Were you wanting to, I guess we're going to be talking at the end here on regulations and forms. For informational purposes, we could actually talk about that right now just to kind of be consistent if you like. Were you going to?
The form?
Yeah, the form.
We linked it into the policy because that's how it was. It wasn't necessarily a link, but it had the name of the form in the MSBA policy, but there was no form linked or attached or anything. So we used a form that Cindy Miller, we found that form from what organization?
American Library Association.
The American Library Association. And it really was, the pieces in it were really what we already had in our previous form before. That was part of 6040. The regulation was just like linked in there. So we just linked it in here. If we wanted to pull that out separately as a regulation piece, the form, or call it a form and pull it separate, we could do that if that's the desire of the board. We just linked it into the actual policies.
And on our agenda for today, it just falls under number 5, which is regulations and forms as information on. I just, I guess, wanted to jump to it if you wanted to add, say any more background on the form itself where board members had it while we were talking about this policy. So I was just trying to be efficient.
I see.
Yeah. So I appreciate you attaching that as well as embedding it in the policy itself. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I just had a question about how this works and where the board has a say in all this. Because obviously we don't have a board member listed on, and really if there was a board member serving on this committee that would be part of some of this decision-making process. How does the policy work forward where if something is being reconsidered and we're going to say, we don't want to use this science textbook anymore, does that come before the board at some point in time where the board's going to vote on that?
One of the ways the board is as part of the policy at the end, there's number 5, which does say the superintendent or superintendent's designee shall inform the requester and the school board of the review committee's decision. So that's one place that the
So
school
that's just
board.
informing the board of a decision, so is this something
And
that's
then
going to?
the number 6 also says the requester shall have the right to appeal the decision of the review committee to the superintendent and the school board. So it is
So the
addressed.
school board, if we're saying no to something or yes to something, and the person is not liking that, then they would have the right to appeal to me and then to the school board. So it would come before the school board if it came as an appeal.
And Paul, another piece on the front end, before any of this reconsideration materials, the board is usually informed before we make any purchases about a curriculum. And so, like when we did the science adoption, you know, we came in front of the board a couple of different times to say these are materials that we're adopting, and it's so that you have an opportunity to be aware of the materials on the front end. Some of our materials are very old, so that like we don't review the old ones, we're just showing you any new ones that we're doing. But yeah, so that's on the front end.
Again, I just wanted the bigger picture of how this all plays out. Thank you.
And that's kind of listed in section 2 as well, just that. It says recognizing the school board, that it has the authority to make the final decisions on the selection. So you probably come and share your expertise with us, and this is why, and that's always really interesting, and then,
So hypothetically, the board could say, we want to move forward with this curriculum or with this materials selection, or we choose not to. So it doesn't have to go through the appeals lane, it could come through that way.
And I appreciate you bringing up the front end there. I've always appreciated when you actually are bringing the textbooks for us to look at and feel and see and that. So, and I know we're kind of reducing the number of textbooks as well, but we never will eliminate them. And Paul, I certainly kind of scanned through there because I remembered when when I had looked at this policy before, as well as the library materials, I was specifically looking for where the school board's role was and wasn't in the policy itself. Is there any other questions or comments? Okay. And I realized I did not read the purpose like I normally do, so I just will go back to that. The purpose of this policy is to provide direction for selection of textbooks and instructional materials. And then there's a further general statement of policy, the responsibility of the selection, the reconsideration, and the legal references and craft references, as is in all of our policies. So. Okay, great. Thank you for your work on this, and thank you for the work of bringing it out for other eyes to look at and comment on. So I know it's an extra step, but as we know, an important step.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so then policies for second reading is policy 606.5, library materials, and again, Cindy Miller gave a lot of background on it. For the first reading, there were some changes with the second reading, but the purpose of this policy is to provide direction and to delegate responsibility for selection and reconsideration of library materials. And so were you gonna highlight anything else on the second reading of it?
So I know that some changes had happened. Senior leaders had some further discussions around a few things. One of the things that has changed in here is the formal request. We had 60 days, so that looks like that's highlighted, and that has been changed in there, just knowing how long sometimes it takes, contract days of students. And then I know that some of the things that were under consideration that we have added back in are like at the very end, that the appeal process for like, we go to consideration, the decision is made, and then what happens after that has been updated as well. But I don't think that there's really much else there.
So those mainly were changes under section E at the end there. And then you also embedded in again the former request for reconsideration. instructional
It's
resource.
been embedded in there too, yep.
Yeah,
And it's the same form as I stated earlier.
that's great. Any additional questions or comments, Paul or Amber?
So the same form as for the textbooks? And
Yes.
for library, I see.
Yep, it's the same form. The reconsideration form for the material is for both
I
policies.
see it, yeah, thank you. There's similarities between the policies in a big way, so.
Why have a different form? That gets confusing for our community, so we just had one form.
And in the first reading, we all acknowledged under the selection of library materials, A3, that library materials shall not be excluded because of the race, nationality, religion, sex, gender identity and orientation, or political views of the writers. And there was a great appreciation for that piece in there.
So, the only place that I can see that's there is D, where it strikes out core principles. So it says section 5D. And it's just a scratch out. I mean, it's a cross out.
I'm not seeing
I'm
it.
not seeing it.
You know what? I'm looking online, so it may.
It's on page 3.
It's on page 3.
Was it under
It's just right.
responsibility for selection of library materials?
It was under
That's fine.
5, selection of
five.
library materials. It was D.
Oh.
It was actually a clerical error. They had it struck a note in the first reading, but I missed it, and so I struck it
It
out.
was just struck out.
That's right.
And that's it.
Do you guys see where that
Oh,
is?
I see now,
Yeah,
yeah.
sorry.
Where it says or principal.
Or
Yes.
principal, correct.
So we'll do a second reading then in December, then it will be adopted. And again, thank you particularly to Cindy Miller and the media specialists throughout the district for the work on that, and NSBA for having a model policy, so for us to work with. Okay, then the next second reading is 506, student discipline. And,
I'm just staying.
okay, just stay.
Jake Laurent is out of town at a conference, and so we had said we would come back with those procedural pieces for you. And so I'm going to do my best. He and I worked on them together, and we did share this back out with principals and TLE and just kind of shared like those updates on that procedure piece. So page 10 of 20, if you go to that page, that's where you start seeing the things that are highlighted in yellow. So if you recall, the last time we talked, we really were talking about how 506 is replacing 5085, but it's also replacing 5085R, which really is just our handbook, has always been like the regulation that fell behind it. We still have our handbook, but we wanted to make sure that things were lining up, and some of the procedural pieces that we have in our handbook were really articulated here. So if you look at C, procedures for removal of a student from class is kind of where we went from C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J needed to be completed. And so that's where we are adding new things for you to review today. On page 10 of 20, is that what it says?
What's the number again? Just to make sure everyone's on the same.
It's weird, the tops of our pages are a higher number,
Yeah.
but if I look at the bottom, I see the 10 of 20, so
It's under 11, removal of students from class, and then it's part starting at C, the procedural pieces that it just was very vague, that districts will insert the procedures here, and so we have articulated what that looks like. So A is procedures for removing a student from class, and that, teachers will be supporting, or will be notifying support staff, and We'll follow our code of conduct as laid out in our handbook is really what we're saying in general for a lot of these things. We talk about how documentation of our majors is being done in our student information system. That is code for Infinite Campus, but student information system is the general term in case we ever were to change that. So we put that there. We do have in there like who now has the custody of a student if removed from a class. So the support student will determine the appropriate location for the student, and then like they will be the ones responsible or a principal responsible unless a parent comes in, a parent or guardian comes and takes the custody of the student at that time, takes over that responsibility. We also talked about in F, the returning of students to classes and being, like planning for reentry, and some of the things that it could do, some harm repair, some conferencing, readmission plans is determined by support staff or administration with collaboration of the classroom teacher. We also put in here the procedures for notifying of parents of the violation of rules of conduct and their disciplinary actions. So you can see that the majors are things that are considered in our handbook as being major or unlawful are communicated in because of the disciplinary action is requiring, that's part in our handbook, it's requiring that parent notification anytime it's under those categories of major or unlawful. We also have in here some language around when we have disabled students and some of the special provisions for them. Just making sure that IEPs teams are able to review things, consider whether there's a need for further assessment, or if any additional or alternative services are needed for students because of that. When we get to the chemical abuse problems, we really had to go dig into those statutes and see what was stated in there. We do not have a chemical abuse program within our site, so we made sure that the language there followed what we have. A teacher who knows or has reason to believe that a student is using, possessing, or is transferring alcohol or a controlled substance while on the school premises or involved in school-related activities shall immediately notify school administration. So that's what needs to happen if we know that. And then the last one that we are required to have in there was immediate interventions. And so we talked about in here that we have the positive, all teachers are learning about each school's positive behavior intervention and supports as identified by each site's PBIS team. So the interventions that are being used at specific schools are related to the PBIS program that each site is engaging with. So every school now has a PBIS team. So we're able to state that in our policy because we have it now. So I believe those are the only things that were changed from the last reading. I don't think that there is anything else. And Patty, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that was just the only area. Like we went back and cleaned up the rest of everything else, the comments and stuff. So, yeah.
Jen, will there need to be any changes on the electronic copy of our handbook because of this policy?
Actually, no. There are going to be some pieces that in the next iteration for next year that we have to make sure that we have in the handbook. The policy is going to take care of some of those things for us, and one of them is removal of discipline or recess. What is it? Recess and other breaks. I think it's 9. If you look at that piece. That is new legislation that happened, and so that was all read last time when you saw it, the whole section about recess. So that's part of that non-exclusionary language that came about from the state. We don't have that currently in our handbook. It will be added in for next year, but by adopting this policy, we'll have the policy for how we handle recess and other breaks. So we're covered as far as the legislative changes go. And then next year when we put that handbook together, we'll make sure that that's all included in there.
Okay. And then, I just want to remind folks too, and we talked about this in the first reading, that there were just, again, a lot of legislative changes that happened that is a part of this policy, and you can see many legal references and cross-references as, again, due to legislative changes. I also just wanted to mention, I appreciated when I was reviewing this again, the section on, let's see, which section was it? That was a long section. D, suspension procedures, and then E, expulsion and exclusion procedures, that's very clearly laid out, and I know that's something as a school board member, particularly when I got started, I was asked a lot about, expulsions, which we rarely do, but when we do, what the procedures were, so that might be a question people get, and that's one of the policies where it highlights it in detail. Any other questions, either Amber or Paul, or comments? Okay, and again, I did not read it. The purpose of 506, the purpose of this policy is to ensure that students are aware of and comply with the school district's expectations for student conduct. Such compliance will enhance the school district's ability to maintain discipline and ensure that there is no interference with the educational process. The school district will take appropriate disciplinary action when students fail to adhere to the code of student conduct established by this policy. So that will, we will have the second reading then this month. And again, it's replacing 5085. The last policy for second reading is 507, corporal punishment. And let me see here. Before you jump in, I will read it. Corporal punishment and prone restraint. The purpose of this policy is to describe limitations on the use of corporal punishment and prone restraints upon students.
Yeah, I don't believe there's been any changes made to that one since our first reading. It's the same.
And that's, of course, to align with the new state statute, and there may very well be a change in state statute in February or March when the legislature gets back together, because I know that there's been some calls for additional clarification, but this would align our policy with current state statute, at least for now.
And that has been referenced as well below in the legal references. So you'll see the new state statutes referenced there.
Last, this Friday and Saturday when Member Lofold and I were down at the NSBA Delegate Legislative Assembly, this was discussed in different ways as well. So and talking to other school districts, I know there was especially a concern that more clarification was happening.
I would recommend that we consider that as part of our lobbying efforts to just make sure that things are as clear as possible so that we don't have that continued rub between the policy and concerns from law enforcement.
I would agree, and just on that note, I think particularly with the policy committee, any policies that, because so much is tied to state state statute that, if there are other policies, particularly that we've reviewed this year, related especially to our students and staff, that we think if they should be a part of our policy agenda or not. Okay, so then policies, so that's the policies for second reading, and then policies for review. 602, organization of school calendar and school day, and this comes about especially because of e-learning days, and Anthony, were you going to speak towards this? Or
I think I was.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
I never
I'll
left.
turn it back to you.
Go ahead.
She's been a beast with,
Yeah, you're just
with the
gonna,
policies this month.
You're just gonna keep seeing me at these policy committee meetings.
so the
Yeah,
purpose of this policy is to provide for a timely determination of the school calendar and school day.
thank you. And I know a lot of this falls under Assistant Superintendent Bond's role as far as like setting the calendar and stuff, but really the piece that has been changed in this policy, there is a little bit of cleaning up with some language. Like they specified Minnesota statute, like they spelled it out, and then they also wanted to make sure that it just used to say labor management process, and now it's through meet and confer / labor management process. So that's something that was a little bit of a cleanup. But the big piece of this policy and the reason why we are looking at adopting it is that we are utilizing e-learning days. We do have that agreement with the union at this point to be able to utilize those. And this just really lays out what an e-learning day is, the definition of it, like how many we can use, how that you have to adopt a plan, and we have the plan that's been put up on our website, and how we're going to be notifying parents. So it's really just laying out that our part of our school calendar, school day, we can tap into those e-learning days is really what this is clarifying for us. Our e-learning plan has been communicated with the community. So it's already been shared. Adele's done a really nice job of making sure that information's out there. So we're good to go.
After the winter we went through last winter, which most of us want to forget, but I'm glad that we're moving forward with e-learning days. Other districts around us are doing this, and you know, we certainly have the capability of doing this. Yes, there's challenges for students across the district to, you know, participate in e-learning days, but at least again we're offering it, and we'll, you know, get better at it once we start doing it, and we'll be able to help those students that need help with e-learning days once we start doing it, and we figure out who needs extra support there.
Yeah.
Good point. And the district has worked hard to try and come up with, I think last year's record snowfall in meeting with the city. Part of the issue that we had last year was what they call stacked snow events, which is storm after storm basically, where they don't have time to completely clean up from one where they're starting another. We do have several other things in place. We have e-learning, of course, which is important. We have alternatives pickup routes for our kids now, so they're based on the main snow emergency routes. So that's a help. We also have a 2-hour late start. So if you know, maybe there's ice on the road, but it looks like it's going to melt off after the sun rises a bit, we have that. And I think that's, there might be one other, but those are some things that we put in place just to try and mitigate some of the effect of the bad weather that we have sometimes.
Will we be, you know, maybe at the start of the year, because we really haven't had that much bad weather, kind of doing like the 1st of January, another kind of reminder about e-learning? I know it's been out there through different things.
I think we should probably have it in our, I mean, we have meetings coming up related to potential snowstorms and things like that. So I think making sure that we continue and repeat it in our newsletters over the course of the next few weeks would be really important for us, especially the alternative routes. We haven't really broadcast that as much.
That'll be good.
And we have had opportunities for students at the secondary level to have like a practice day where teachers really walk them through, and we've also had opportunities during conferencing nights for teachers at the elementary to really put the plan in front of parents as well. So there's been some preliminary groundwork that has happened, and I think as we get closer to actually having to have a day, we'll just keep communicating.
We also added a minute to each of our periods at the high school schedule because it was the high school that was falling short related to hours of instruction. That was the other piece that I forgot. So that basically allows us to meet state standard for minimum number of minutes and hours.
And I know from serving on the QSC Quality Steering Committee that, you know, it's been different discussions have happened with our labor management process on e-learning, and there's been favorable conversation around it. I was just going to ask, I'm just looking again at the legal references, and it does highlight Juneteenth, is that highlighted? Did I miss it in this policy someplace? In the legal references, it mentions Juneteenth, but in the policy itself.
I don't know that they have the holidays laid out here.
Oh, okay, and we
At all.
don't need to? Okay.
Yeah,
It just kind of highlights holidays in general, okay.
Yeah, that's what it appears to be.
Maybe it's just
Right.
like, when it became legally holiday.
Okay.
Is there work ongoing for the 24-25 school year calendar? Is that near
Yeah,
ready for submission to the board, or is that?
So I think part of that is part of the issue is that is we're, through negotiations, we're working on potentially adding more professional learning time. There's been an interest by both sides to explore that. So we might be a little more delayed. One thing that we could consider with the board would be to produce a published calendar and then have some days that were potentially days that school would not be in session as like a hold on people's calendar, but I think we need to see how long does this take? Like if by the time if it's the end of January and people are really starting to want to know the calendar, then I think we should produce something that has the possible hold days, but otherwise I think we should just let negotiations play out just a little bit longer.
yeah, I would agree. I think we don't want to put out a calendar that we're changing if we can hold off. I think that confuses parents and caregivers. And as noted in here, the provisions, we don't need to until April 1st, right? Adopt a school calendar. And we always liked it earlier, but.
Right, as
yeah.
practice.
Yeah, as practice, I know we
Like
do.
communication with families and staff so that we can plan around, so everyone can plan around vacations and holidays.
Mhm. Okay. Any other discussion then on the organization of school calendar and school day? Okay. And then regulations and forms, again, we reviewed 606.5, formal request for reconsideration, instructional resource of specific library material. That's a mouthful there. So the only other thing I wanted to add under other, unless anyone else has any other comments, is that we did talk with Adele and spent some time on just talking about how we're rolling out the listening session with our public comment period changing, and so there will be communication going out through our traditional channels that we get out policy changes, and then at every meeting we also will be announcing it, so it will start officially at our January 23rd, 2024 meeting. And then there will be information put on our website, and we're just kind of firming up what that language looks like. So just wanted to give a quick update on that. Is there any other thing that falls under other you want to add?
On that topic, I do think it's important that the future board, the board going forward with this change to public comment and listening sessions, that the board listen to the public and respects their needs and looks at this policy with some flexibility. There was an issue with the changes made prior to the second meeting, and then the fact that didn't go up the same day Cow did for people to see, to review before our board meeting. So there are individuals that have contacted me, besides maybe the one individual that has contacted you, and maybe you've had other people contact you also. But I do think it's important that the board, listen to public comment that probably is going to continue to come in on this change, and respect the needs of the community. So if if that applies to how people sign up for it, or, and if the sign up's not full, then, maybe they can sign up if they show up, if there's openings, because I think, again, if the board set aside a time of 45 minutes for public comment prior to a board meeting, and there's only 3 people signed up, well then, if people show up with something to say, they should have that opportunity to sign up at that time. Otherwise the board should be sitting here, be present for that 45 minutes of a listening session, if that's what the board is set aside to do. So again, I think it's important to hear the public and what they have to say with this policy, and maybe be flexible with some changes going forward.
Okay, any other comments?
No, I think those are good points, Member Sandholm. And I appreciate that we put a lot of thought into, how that policy is, what's the words I'm looking for? It's going to be, I think it's going to make it more accessible to people, and I'm hoping, but I think it's also important to listen. And I appreciate that we took the time to look at other districts, and I think it's always good to keep things in mind and see how they go, and make sure that we're being accessible to everyone.
Mm-hmm. And I did hear from some parents, and I just have opportunity to be around parents a lot, from elementary to middle school to high school, and I did get feedback on the positiveness of having it at a set time before the meetings from parents and caregivers. So, but yeah, like we talked about when we were discussing it, that like any policy, we will look at, review, and revise as we see appropriate. So, yeah.
I agree.
Okay, anything else? Okay. Well, we have another meeting starting at 4:30, so this gives everyone a few minutes before we start up again. And again, our next meeting will be, I did look at the January, I looked at the date for our regular meeting, but I didn't look for when our next policy committee meeting will be in January. Can you pull that up, please?
Thank you. And while you're doing that, I do want to take this opportunity to thank Director Lara for all of her hard work, for getting these policies ready, her and the team that assisted her with those things. So I want to thank her publicly for all of that hard work, so thank you.
Yeah.
As do I.
Yeah.
Thanks to Cindy and Dale. And I also want to say, so the next policy committee is on January 9th. And I'd also like to say thanks to Member Sandholm. This is the last of his policy committee meetings, and you've served in many different capacities, and your role on the policy committee with very insightful questions, thinking about what's best for students, what's best for families, what's best for staff, has been really helpful. Just want to say thanks for your time on this subcommittee.
Thank you.
Okay, then we'll wrap up until January 9th for the next policy meeting. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
2024.
It seems a long ways off.
Thank you.
Where are Jeff?